Another day, another story. The theory according to which the US threatened the European powers and took the form of the policeman of the region. America for Americans only. This phrase describes the oldest and most important foreign policy of the United States, which is 200 years old. It is also known as the Monroe Theory. On December 2, 1823, American President James Monroe presented this theory to the American Congress, in which he urged the European powers to stay away from the American continent. This was the time when wars of independence were fought against the colonial rule of Spain, France and Portugal in North and Latin America. James Monroe said in his address that no European power should wish to establish a colonial system here in the future. He made it clear that any such attempt would be considered an attack on America. At the same time, he assured that his country will not become a part of any European conflict. However, this ideology became a policy that expanded the spread of American influence and economic interests. Professor Alex Bryan is an expert in American history. The Monroe Doctrine has evolved over time, depending on who interprets what it means, he says. On the other hand, in the name of the same ideology, the United States made political, military and economic interventions in Latin America several times in the last 2 centuries, and thus Latin America came under the influence of the American state. Why did this theory come into existence? This address by President Monroe came after the formation of an alliance of Russia, Austria and Prussia in Europe, apparently formed to defend the monarchy against revolutionary movements. In this context, Great Britain supported the United States, and President Monroe and his Secretary of State John Quincy Adams made a policy to defend the sovereignty of the continental United States with the help of British naval power. Monroe told the US Congress that we will consider any attempt by a European power to impose its system in this region as a threat to peace and security. Professor Alex says that the main meaning of this statement was that the United States would consider any attempt to establish a colonial system anywhere in the continental United States, including North and Latin America, as a threat to its national interest. However, it was not easy to implement this theory because America had not become a superpower at that time. America had been free for a long time, but it was a weak country that was confined to the East Coast even on its own land, says Veere Mandukarillo. According to experts, the effects of this ideology were seen decades later, especially during the end of the 19th century and the 20th century. Theory of extent. According to Carrillo, American President James Polk first derived the meaning of the idea that the United States should expand its influence. Then America invaded Mexico and took 55% of its land. Later, the US also intervened in the Dominican Republic and Panama. Meanwhile, France intervened in Mexico in 1862, where Napoleon III established an empire with the help of conservatives. This was a proof that the Monroe Doctrine has not remained the same in all places and times. For one thing, the American Civil War also reduced the chances of any kind of intervention. Professor Alex says that during the 19th century America did not have enough power to implement this ideology. American President Rutherford also interpreted this view and declared Latin America and the Caribbean as an area of American influence. At that time, Nicaragua and Panama were very important for maritime trade. As part of a policy of increasing influence, the United States supported the Cuban and Puerto Rican Wars of Independence in 1898. American Policeman. At the end of the 19th century, the United States acted as a mediator in the dispute between Venezuela and Great Britain over Guyana. In 1903, the United States again had to mediate when Great Britain imposed a naval embargo on Venezuela to repay the debt. It was at this time that US President Theodore Roosevelt added to the Monroe Doctrine that his country could intervene in the internal affairs of any Latin American country if that country committed any crimes. In later years, the United States became a military and economic power. According to Carrillo, the United States gave itself the role of policeman under the pretext of protecting the continent. In this role, the United States intervened in Latin America more than 30 times. America's influence increased during the First and Second World Wars, and then during the Cold War, American presidents intervened in Latin America several times under the pretext of the communist threat. There are many theories, says Carrillo: Truman, Kennedy, Johnson. But if you think about it, all these were interpretations of the Monroe Doctrine. Is this US policy still in effect? Professor Alex believes that to me, this theory is still applied as it was in the past when it was actually a message against the colonial system that no longer exists. The idea that gave rise to the idea that the United States has the right to interfere in the affairs of its neighbors is still active, Carrillo says. Thanks for watching.